Grandma, why don't you just finish dusting the shelves before you go? Oh, and could you pick up some groceries on your way back tomorrow? My 8-year-old granddaughter said this to me so casually, barely looking up from her tablet. I froze, duster in hand, my heart cracking just a little more. For 3 years, I had been Martha the cleaning lady to my own grandchildren, a stranger who came twice a week to their home. They had no idea I was their grandmother. My own son, Richard, had orchestrated this elaborate lie, erasing me from their lives while still benefiting from my desperate desire to be near them. But everything changed the day my lawyer walked through their front door with a stack of documents that would shatter the web of lies my son had spun. This is the story of how I reclaimed my identity, my dignity, and my rightful place in my grandchildren's lives. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. I still remember the day Richard was born, April 12, 1982. The weight of his tiny body in my arms, just 6 pounds 4 ounces, his eyes screwed shut against the harsh hospital lights. I was only 22, barely an adult myself. His father, James, stood beside the bed, his face a mixture of terror and pride. We were young, unprepared, but so in love, with each other, and immediately with our son. "We made him," I whispered, to James, unable to believe that something so perfect could come from us. Life wasn't easy. James worked double shifts at the manufacturing plant while I took night classes in business administration, passing our baby between us like a relay baton. Our apartment was small, our furniture secondhand, but we were building something together. When Richard took his first steps across our worn living room carpet, we both cried. We sacrificed everything for Richard. Vacations were camping trips to state parks instead of the European adventures my college friends were taking. Date nights became rare occasions. Our social life dwindled to birthday parties for Richard's friends and neighborhood barbecues. But we never resented it, not once. By the time Richard was 10, I had my business degree and had started working at a small marketing firm. James had been promoted to floor manager at the plant. We saved enough to buy a modest 3-bedroom house in a good school district. We wanted Richard to have every opportunity, every advantage we could possibly provide. Richard was bright, exceptionally so. His teachers recognized it early, placing him in gifted programs. We encouraged his intellect, filling our home with books, taking him to museums, engaging with his curious mind. When he expressed interest in becoming a doctor at 14, we started a special college fund, cutting expenses even further to grow his educational nest egg. Through high school, Richard remained focused and driven. While other parents worried about their teenagers experimenting with alcohol or staying out too late, our concerns were that Richard studied too much, rarely making time for friends or fun. I sometimes worried he was missing out on the social aspects of adolescence, but James assured me that our son simply knew what he wanted and was pursuing it with determination. "He gets that from you," James would say, squeezing my hand. That single-minded focus. Richard graduated as valedictorian and earned a full scholarship to Northwestern University. The day we drove him to campus, I couldn't stop crying. Tears of pride mixed with the ache of letting go. James kept his emotions better contained until we returned to our empty house. Then he sat on Richard's bed and wept openly. "We did good. Eleanor," he said. "We gave him wings." During college, Richard called regularly at first. He was thriving academically, but also finally coming out of his shell socially. He joined study groups, attended campus events, and in his sophomore year, started dating a girl named Melissa from his organic chemistry class. "She's brilliant, Mom," he told me over the phone. "And beautiful. You and Dad will love her." When he brought Melissa home for Thanksgiving break, I understood immediately. She was indeed beautiful, tall and willowy with dark hair that fell past her shoulders in loose waves. But more than her physical appearance, There was something about her presence that commanded attention. She was poised, articulate, and carried herself with the confidence of someone who had never questioned her place in the world. I learned over dinner that Melissa came from a wealthy family in Connecticut. Her father was a surgeon, her mother, a former model who now headed a charitable foundation. She had attended private schools, spent summers in Europe, and spoke 3 languages. Next to our modest home and simple lives, her background seemed like something from another world, but she was unfailingly polite, complimenting my cooking and asking James thoughtful questions about his work. I wanted to like her. I truly did. Yet something in the way she surveyed our home, the slight hesitation before she sat on our well-worn couch, made me uneasy. "What do you think?" Richard asked later when Melissa was upstairs getting ready for bed. "She seems lovely," I said carefully. "Very accomplished." "But?" Richard pressed, knowing me too well. "No buts," I insisted. "I just hope she appreciates you, all of you, including where you come from." Richard's face clouded slightly. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing bad," I backpedaled. "You come from a good home with parents who love you. That's all I meant." He seemed satisfied with my answer, but something shifted that weekend. It was subtle. A slight distancing, a new awareness of our differences. Richard began to see our home through Melissa's eyes, and I feared he found it lacking. Over the next 2 years, Richard's visits became less frequent. His calls were shortened. He spent holidays with Melissa's family, sending us apologetic texts, with promises to visit soon. James and I told ourselves this was normal. He was building his own life, as we had raised him to do. Richard and Melissa both got into the same prestigious medical school after graduation. They moved in together, and our contact became even more sporadic. I followed their lives through Richard's occasional updates and the photos he posted online. A beautiful apartment I knew we could never afford. Vacations to places James and I had only dreamed of visiting. Melissa's enormous engagement ring, when they decided to marry during their 2nd year of medical school. They planned an extravagant wedding at Melissa's parents' estate in Connecticut. James and I scraped together enough for appropriate attire and a gift we hoped wouldn't embarrass our son. The weekend was a blur of luxury that made me acutely aware of the divide between our world and the one Richard was now part of. At the rehearsal dinner, Melissa's father gave a speech about legacy and the joining of 2 exceptional families. When it came time for James to speak, his honest, heartfelt words about working hard and loving deeply seemed out of place among the polished anecdotes of the other guests. I saw Richard shift uncomfortably in his seat, and my heart broke a little. The wedding itself was like something from a magazine. Hundreds of guests, flowers flown in from overseas, a 10-piece orchestra. I felt like an extra in a play about my son's life rather than a key character. When I hugged Richard before the ceremony, he seemed distracted, his mind already elsewhere. "We're so proud of you," I whispered. "Thanks, Mom," he replied, patting my back awkwardly before a wedding planner whisked him away. After the wedding, Richard and Melissa's lives accelerated. They completed medical school and matched at the same prestigious hospital for their residencies. Richard specialized in cardiothoracic surgery, Melissa in dermatology. They bought a beautiful house in an exclusive suburb of Chicago. Their social media showed them at galas, fundraisers, on yachts with friends who all seemed to share their privileged lifestyle. James and I continued our same routines, him at the manufacturing plant, me having eventually worked my way up to marketing director. At a local company, we were comfortable but not wealthy, content but not extravagant. The distance between our lives and Richard's grew with each passing year. When James was diagnosed with progressive heart failure at 62, Richard flew in for a weekend. He consulted with the doctors, used his connections to get James transferred to a better hospital, and then returned to his life in Chicago. He called for updates but couldn't get away from his surgical residency for the months of James's decline. "He's doing what he can," I defended Richard to my sister, who questioned his absence. His work saves lives. James died on a Tuesday morning, in September. Richard flew in for the funeral and left the next day. During his brief visit, he seemed like a stranger, poised, professional, and emotionally distant. He handled the funeral arrangements with efficiency, wrote checks to cover expenses I couldn't manage, and spoke eloquently at the service. But the son who had once cried with us over skinned knees and school achievements was nowhere to be found. "I'm sorry I can't stay longer," he said at the airport. "The department is already short-staffed and I have patients counting on me." "I understand," I said, though I didn't. Not really. 6 months after James's death, Richard called with news. Melissa was pregnant. Despite my grief, joy bloomed in my heart. A grandchild. A new beginning. A reason to look forward again. "That's wonderful news," I said, tears springing to my eyes. "I'm so happy for you both." "Thanks, Mom. Listen, we've been thinking about this, and we'd like you to move closer to us. The baby will need family nearby, and you shouldn't be alone in that house with all those memories." His offer stunned me. After years of growing distance, was this pregnancy bringing us back together? I didn't hesitate. I sold the house where James and I had built our life, auctioned most of our furniture, and packed what mattered into a small moving truck. I found a modest apartment just 20 minutes from Richard and Melissa's neighborhood and transferred to a branch office of my company in Chicago. Everything happened quickly. Within 2 months of Richard's call, I was settled in my new place, eagerly awaiting my role as grandmother. I imagined Sunday dinners, babysitting afternoons, being a regular presence in my grandchild's life. I even took early retirement to ensure I would be available whenever needed. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. Twins, a boy and a girl, arrived 3 months after my move. Jackson and Emma were perfect, with Richard's dark hair and Melissa's delicate features. I rushed to the hospital as soon as Richard called, arms filled with gifts I had carefully selected over previous weeks. The hospital room was already crowded with Melissa's family when I arrived. Her mother held one baby while her father photographed, the other in Richard's arms. I stood awkwardly in the doorway, suddenly uncertain of my place in this tableau. "Mom, you made it," Richard said, noticing me after several moments. His smile seemed genuine but distracted. "Come meet your grandchildren." I approached cautiously, navigating around flower arrangements and gift baskets. When Richard placed tiny Emma in my arms, the world narrowed to just her perfect face. My granddaughter, my son's daughter. A continuation of the life James and I had started together. Tears spilled down my cheeks as I whispered a promise to always be there for her. The first few weeks after the twins came home, I called daily, offering to help. Melissa's mother had moved in temporarily, and Richard assured me they had everything under control. "Let us get into a routine first," he said. "We'll have you over soon." Soon stretched into weeks, then months. I was invited for brief, orchestrated visits, an hour here, a quick lunch there. Always when the babies were napping or just after they'd been fed, limiting my interaction with them. When I offered to babysit, Melissa mentioned they had a night nurse. When I brought homemade baby food, Richard explained they were following a specific nutritional plan developed by a colleague, specializing in pediatric nutrition. By the twins' first birthday, I had seen them fewer than a dozen times. The elaborate party Melissa planned coincided with a large medical conference, and my invitation specified a 1-hour window during which extended family could attend. I arrived with carefully chosen gifts and found myself among distant cousins and professional colleagues rather than close family. "Could I come by tomorrow to spend some one-on-one time with the twins?" I asked Richard as the party wound down. "This week is pretty hectic," he hedged. "Let me check with Melissa and get back to you." He didn't. When I called the following week, their nanny informed me they had gone to Melissa's parents' vacation home for a couple of weeks. I learned of the trip through this stranger rather than from my own son. As the twins approached their second birthday, my visits had become even rarer. I sent gifts that went unacknowledged, left voicemails that weren't returned. My life, which I had uprooted to be near my grandchildren, felt emptier than ever without James, and with only the ghost of a relationship with my son. Then came the call that would change everything. "Mom," Richard's voice sounded strained. "We have a situation. Our housekeeper quit unexpectedly and we're in a bind. I know it's a lot to ask, but would you be willing to help out temporarily? Just until we find a suitable replacement?" "Of course," I answered immediately, pathetically grateful for any reason to be in their home, near the grandchildren I barely knew. "There's one thing," Richard continued, hesitation evident in his voice. "The twins are at an impressionable age, and we've been very selective about who we introduce as family, given how infrequently they've seen you." "What are you saying, Richard?" My voice hardened as understanding dawned. "It would be easier if they just knew you as Martha, the new housekeeper. Just temporarily, until we figure out how to properly incorporate extended family into their lives." The request, no, the demand, left me breathless. He wanted me to pretend to be the help, to deny my identity as grandmother to children I had every right to know and love. My first instinct was to refuse, to hang up and never speak to him again. But then I thought of Jackson and Emma, now toddlers who giggled and babbled and were developing personalities. Grandchildren I desperately wanted to know. If this charade was the only way to be near them? "Fine," I said, the word like ash in my mouth. "When do I start?" And so began my role as Martha, arriving at Richard and Melissa's immaculate home, twice weekly to clean, do laundry, and occasionally prepare meals, all while watching my grandchildren grow up from a careful distance, instructed not to hug them or show too much affection. "Martha is here." The twins would eventually cheer when I arrived, breaking my heart anew each time with the name that wasn't mine. For 3 years I lived this lie. I dusted photographs of Richard and Melissa with the twins at Disney World, a trip I hadn't known about. I vacuumed under the Christmas tree, surrounded by presents with tags from Grandma and Grandpa Stevens, Melissa's parents, but none from me. I washed tiny clothes and folded them with love that had to remain unexpressed. I watched Emma develop a talent for drawing and Jackson build elaborate structures with blocks. I witnessed first words become full sentences, first steps grow into running and jumping, all while pretending to be someone I wasn't, swallowing the pain when they called Melissa's mother Grandma during her frequent visits. Richard paid me for my work, an insult atop injury, depositing money into my account monthly for cleaning, my own son's home for the privilege of glimpsing my grandchildren's lives. I took the money and put it all into a separate account, unable to spend what felt like blood money. Melissa rarely acknowledged my presence beyond listing tasks that needed attention. Richard avoided being home during my scheduled times. The twins, however, grew to like Martha. They would show me their toys, ask for stories, occasionally lean against me while I folded laundry. These moments sustained me, even as they broke my heart. I lived for those brief connections, Emma asking me to admire her drawings, Jackson seeking my help with tricky puzzle pieces. I memorized every detail, the way Emma's nose crinkled when she concentrated, the exact sound of Jackson's laugh. These stolen moments were all I had of my grandchildren's childhoods. As they grew older and more perceptive, I lived in fear they would somehow discover the truth, that they would find old photographs or ask questions about family resemblances, that my careful performance as Martha would slip, revealing the grandmother beneath the housekeeper's mask. The deception weighed on me, aging me beyond my years. Friends from my former life barely recognized me when we video chatted. I withdrew from social activities, unable to explain the bizarre arrangement or my willingness to accept such humiliation. My world narrowed to those 2 days a week in Richard's home, to the crumbs of interaction with Jackson and Emma. 3 years into this arrangement, Emma, now 5 and precariously observant, looked at me thoughtfully as I dusted the living room shelves. "Martha, why do you look a little bit like Daddy?" she asked, her head tilted curiously. I froze, duster in hand, heart pounding. Before I could formulate a response, Melissa swept into the room. "Emma, don't bother Martha while she's working," she said sharply. "Go finish your piano practice." After Emma reluctantly left, Melissa turned to me, her expression cold. "I think it's time we discussed your arrangement here," she said. "The children are asking questions that complicate matters." That evening, I received a text from Richard. "We need to talk about your position. Can you come by the house tomorrow? The children will be at their activities." I knew what was coming. They were going to end even this painful charade, cutting me off completely from Jackson and Emma. The thought of never seeing them again, of becoming a ghost in their lives, was unbearable. That night, I made the hardest phone call of my life. "Hello, is this Bradley Williams' law office? My name is Eleanor Mitchell. I need to speak with someone about grandparents' rights." Grandparents' rights? The lawyer, Andrew Pearson, leaned forward across his polished desk. His office was modest but professional, with law books lining the walls and framed credentials hanging behind him. "Those can be challenging cases, Mrs. Mitchell. They vary significantly by state." I clutched my purse in my lap, my knuckles white. At 65, I never imagined I'd be sitting in a lawyer's office fighting for the right to be acknowledged as a grandmother. "I understand it's difficult," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "But I need to know my options." I spent the next hour detailing the bizarre arrangement with Richard and Melissa, how I'd been relegated to the role of housekeeper, denied my identity, forced to watch my grandchildren grow up as strangers. As I spoke, Andrew took careful notes, his expression growing increasingly troubled. "Mrs. Mitchell, what you're describing goes beyond the usual grandparent visitation disputes. This is—" He paused, searching for the right words. "Psychological manipulation, at minimum." "Can you help me?" I asked simply. Andrew set down his pen and folded his hands. "Illinois has relatively favorable grandparent visitation statutes, especially in cases where there's been an established relationship with the children. The fact that you've been present in their lives, albeit under false pretenses arranged by their parents, actually works in our favor." He explained the legal process, filing a petition, gathering evidence, possibly appearing before a judge. The courts would consider the children's best interests above all else. "But I should warn you," he cautioned, "these cases can be emotionally draining, and they can permanently damage your relationship with your son." I laughed bitterly. "What relationship? He's been systematically erasing me from his life and his children's lives for years. I have nothing left to lose." As I left Andrew's office that day, a strange sense of calm replaced the anxiety that had been my constant companion. For 3 years, I had been powerless, accepting whatever scraps of connection Richard and Melissa deigned to offer. Now, I was taking back control. The next day, I arrived at Richard and Melissa's house at the appointed time. Their modernist mansion loomed before me, all sharp angles and vast windows, beautiful but cold, much like my relationship with them. I'd cleaned every inch of this house, but had never been welcomed into it. Richard opened the door, his expression guarded. He'd taken time off from the hospital for this meeting, an unprecedented occurrence that signaled the seriousness with which he viewed the Martha situation, as I'd begun to think of it in my more cynical moments. "Mom, come in," he said, ushering me through the foyer into their formal living room, a space I usually only entered to dust. Melissa sat perched on a cream-colored sofa, immaculate as always in a cashmere sweater and tailored slacks. The room was spotless. They hadn't needed my cleaning services after all. Just another pretense. Eleanor, Melissa nodded coolly. She rarely addressed me directly, and never by name during my cleaning visits. I took a seat across from them, noting the tension in Richard's shoulders, the slight furrow between Melissa's perfectly shaped eyebrows. They expected me to be compliant, to accept whatever new arrangement they proposed. They were about to be severely disappointed. "Thank you for coming," Richard began, his doctor voice in full effect. Professional, slightly detached. "We wanted to discuss the current situation. With the twins, they're getting older now, asking more questions." "They're becoming more perceptive," Melissa interjected. "Emma, especially. Her comment yesterday about your resemblance to Richard concerns us." "We think it might be best," Richard continued, "if we made some changes to the arrangement." I waited, letting the silence stretch uncomfortably. "We've found an excellent housekeeping service," he finally said. "Very professional, highly recommended by several colleagues." "So, you're firing me," I stated flatly. Richard winced. "I wouldn't put it that way. We're just transitioning to a more appropriate solution for our family's needs," Melissa finished, her tone businesslike. "And what about my needs?" I asked quietly. "What about Jackson and Emma's need to know their grandmother?" Richard's expression darkened. "Mom, we've discussed this. We agreed that—" "No, Richard, you decided. I never agreed to anything. I simply did what was necessary to have some contact with my grandchildren." Melissa straightened, her posture defensive. "We've always been very clear about our parenting philosophy. We believe in curated relationships for the twins, quality over quantity. We carefully select who has influence in their lives. And your mother makes the cut. But I don't?" The bitterness I'd suppressed for years seeped into my voice. "My parents have been consistently present," Melissa replied. "They understand our boundaries and expectations." "Because they're wealthy? Because they can take the twins to Europe and buy them designer clothes? Is that why they're worthy grandparents while I'm just the help?" Richard shifted uncomfortably. "Mom, that's not fair. This isn't about money." "Isn't it?" I challenged myself. "Would you have asked your father-in-law to pose as the gardener if he didn't meet your standards?" The question hung in the air, unanswered, because we all knew the truth. This had always been about class, about Richard's discomfort with his working class. Origins, about Melissa's carefully cultivated social image. "Look," Richard tried again, his tone conciliatory, "we appreciate everything you've done. Maybe in the future, when the twins are older and can better understand complex family dynamics—" "I'll be dead," I interrupted bluntly. "Is that your plan, Richard? To wait until I'm gone so you never have to explain to your children why you forced their grandmother to clean their toilets for the privilege of seeing them twice a week?" The harsh words landed like physical blows. Melissa's face flushed with anger while Richard paled. "That's completely unfair," he protested. "We've been trying to balance everyone's needs." "No, you've been catering to your wife's need to pretend your background doesn't exist," I said, standing up. My hands were shaking, but my voice remained steady. "Well, I'm done pretending. I'm done being erased." "What does that mean?" Melissa asked sharply. I gathered my purse, preparing to leave. "It means you'll be hearing from my lawyer." "Your lawyer?" Richard stood abruptly. "Mom, don't be ridiculous. We can work this out as a family." "We stopped being a family the moment you asked me to deny who I am," I replied, moving toward the door. "And just so you know, I've saved every penny you've paid me for cleaning your house. I'll be using it to fund my legal fees." The look of shock on their faces would have been satisfying if the situation weren't so heartbreaking. "You can't be serious," Melissa said, following me to the foyer. "You would drag us into court? Create a public spectacle? What would that do? To the twins?" I turned to face them one last time. "What has your deception already done to them? They deserve to know who they are and where they come from. All of it. Not just the parts you find acceptable." With that, I walked out, closing, the door firmly behind me. In my car, I finally allowed the tears to come. Tears of grief for what had been lost, but also tears of relief. After years of silent suffering, I had finally spoken my truth. The next few weeks passed in a blur of legal consultations and paperwork. Andrew proved to be not just competent but compassionate, guiding me through the complex process of asserting my rights as a grandparent. We gathered evidence of my ongoing relationship with the twins, including text messages from Richard requesting my housekeeping services and bank records showing his payments. Richard called repeatedly after our confrontation, his messages oscillating between pleas for reconciliation and thinly veiled threats about the consequences of legal action. I redirected all communication through Andrew, unable to trust myself to engage directly with my son without crumbling. One evening, about 3 weeks after I walked out of Richard's house, my doorbell rang. I approached cautiously, peering through the peephole. Richard stood on my doorstep, alone, looking uncharacteristically disheveled. I hesitated before opening the door. "You should be talking to my lawyer." "Mom, please," he said, his voice hoarse. "I'm here as your son, not as opposing counsel." I reluctantly let him in, leading him to my small living room. My apartment was modest compared to his mansion, but it was warm and filled with memories. Photos of Richard growing up, items from the home I'd shared with James, crafts the twins had given to Martha that they would never know were treasured by their grandmother. Richard sat heavily on my couch, looking around at the mementos of his childhood that decorated my walls. For the first time in years, I saw a flicker of recognition in his eyes, a connection to the person he used to be. "Why are you doing this?" he asked, his tone more bewildered than accusatory. "Why am I fighting to be acknowledged as your children's grandmother? Is that really a question you need to ask?" He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so reminiscent of James that my heart ached. "It's just a lawsuit? Public court records? Do you know what that could do to my professional reputation? To Melissa's standing in her charitable organizations? Is that really what you're worried about? Your reputation? Not the fact that you've been lying to your children about their family?" We were trying to provide them with stability, with consistent relationships. By erasing half of their heritage, I challenged myself. By pretending their father emerged fully formed from an elite background with no connection to working people? Richard looked away, unable to meet my gaze. "It wasn't like that. It was just easier this way." "Easier for whom?" I asked softly. "Not for Jackson and Emma, who are being denied a relationship with their grandmother. Not for me, forced to play act as someone I'm not. Just easier for you and Melissa to maintain the fiction of your perfect life." A long silence stretched between us. When Richard finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I didn't mean for it to go this far. In the beginning, it was just temporary, until we figured things out. Then it became the status quo, and changing it seemed more complicated than continuing." "Richard," I said, leaning forward, "do you remember when you were 9 and that boy at school made fun of your secondhand clothes? Do you remember what your father told you?" He swallowed hard, nodding slightly. He said, "Never be ashamed of working hard and doing your best with what you have." That's all your father and I ever did. We worked hard to give you opportunities to help you become who you are today. And somehow that became something shameful, something to hide from your own children. Tears welled in Richard's eyes, the first genuine emotion I'd seen from him in years. "I don't know how to fix this." "Start by telling the truth," I said simply, "to your children, to Melissa, to yourself." He shook his head. "It's not that simple. Melissa believes strongly in protecting the twins from unnecessary complications. Her own parents had a messy divorce, and she grew up with conflicting loyalties. Complicated family events. She wants something more streamlined for our kids. And you think lying to them accomplishes that? Richard, they will find out eventually. Wouldn't you rather control how that happens? He stood abruptly. I need to think. This isn't just my decision to make. Yes, it is, I countered, rising to face him. You're their father. You have a responsibility to them that transcends whatever agreement you've made with Melissa about curating their relationships. Richard moved toward the door, pausing with his hand on the knob. I'll talk to Melissa. Maybe we can find a compromise. There is no compromise on the truth, Richard. I'm either your children's grandmother, or I'm not. And we both know which one is reality. After he left, I wondered if I'd pushed too hard, if I'd closed the door on a peaceful resolution. But after years of capitulation, I couldn't back down. Now, not when the stakes were so high. The next day, Andrew called. They want to meet, he said. Their lawyer contacted me this morning. They're requesting mediation before we proceed with the court filing. Do you think it's a delay tactic? I asked, suspicious of Richard and Melissa's motives. Possibly, Andrew admitted. But it's also a chance to resolve this without the public record you've been concerned about. If they're serious about finding a solution, mediation could be productive. And if not, we proceed with our filing as planned. We agreed to a mediation session the following week at Andrew's office, neutral territory where neither side would have the home court advantage. I spent the intervening days steeling myself for another confrontation, rehearsing what I would and wouldn't accept as a resolution. When the day arrived, I dressed carefully in a navy suit I'd worn to professional marketing presentations years earlier. Not as expensive as anything Melissa would wear, but dignified and appropriate. I arrived early, settling into the conference room with Andrew, reviewing our strategy one final time. Richard and Melissa arrived precisely on time, accompanied by their lawyer, a stern-looking woman in her 50s whose reputation, Andrew had informed me, made her one of the top family law attorneys in Chicago. The power play wasn't lost on me. They'd hired the best to intimidate us. As we took our places around the conference table, I maintained my composure, meeting Richard's gaze. Steadily. Melissa, as always, was harder to read, her expression professionally neutral. Their lawyer laid out a folder of documents, spine-labeled Mitchell Grandparent Visitation Dispute. The mediator, a former family court judge, introduced himself and outlined the process. I understand this is a sensitive situation involving grandparent visitation rights. Before we begin formal presentations, I'd like to ask if there's any possibility of reaching an amicable agreement today. Richard's lawyer spoke first. My clients are open to discussing a structured visitation schedule, provided certain conditions are met regarding privacy and consistency for the children. I glanced at Andrew, who gave a slight nod. We're prepared to hear their proposal, he replied. Richard cleared his throat. Before we get into specifics, I'd like to speak directly to my mother, if that's acceptable. He looked to the mediator, who nodded permission. Mom, Richard began, his voice less assured than usual. I've done a lot of thinking since our conversation. About Dad, about how we raised me, about the values you instilled. He paused, seemingly struggling with his words. I've also had some difficult conversations with Melissa about our family history and why it matters. Melissa shifted in her seat but remained silent, her eyes fixed on an invisible point on the wall. The truth is, Richard continued, I've been ashamed. Not of you or Dad, but of myself, of how easily I set aside everything you taught me in pursuit of a different kind of life. I convinced myself I was protecting the twins from confusion, but really, I was protecting myself from confronting the choices I've made. His raw honesty caught me off guard. This vulnerability was the Richard I remembered, the son I'd raised. We've prepared an offer, their lawyer interjected, sliding a document across the table. Full grandparent recognition, weekly visitation, rights, inclusion in family events, holidays on a rotating schedule. That won't be necessary, Richard interrupted, to the visible surprise of his own attorney. We're not offering visitation. My heart sank. After all the emotional buildup, was he still denying me? We're offering integration, Richard clarified. Mom should be part of our family because she is our family. The twins need to know their grandmother, their real grandmother, not some fictional housekeeper. Melissa finally spoke, her voice tight but controlled. We would like to begin a transition period, introducing Eleanor properly to the children, explaining our family history in age-appropriate ways. Our child psychologist has provided guidance on how to manage this conversation. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You're agreeing? Just like that? Not just like that, Melissa replied. We've had extensive discussions. Richard has made some compelling points about family legacy and authenticity. Her tone suggested these discussions had been far from harmonious. Richard reached across the table, tentatively offering his hand. I can't undo the past 3 years, Mom. I can't give you back that time with the twins. But I can promise you won't miss another moment of their lives going forward. I looked at his outstretched hand, then at Andrew, uncertainty flooding through. Me. Was this real, or another manipulation? Andrew leaned close, whispering, We can still formalize this in a legally binding agreement. They can't backtrack once it's documented. I nodded, then turned back to Richard. I want this in writing, every detail, and I want to be there when you tell the twins who I really am. Of course, Richard agreed readily. Too readily? There's one more thing, I said, making a decision at that moment. I want Jackson and Emma to know about James, about their grandfather. I want his pictures in your home, his stories told at bedtime. He deserves to be remembered. Richard's eyes glistened. Yes, they should know him. They should know where they come from. All of it. As our lawyers began drafting the formal agreement, I struggled to process this sudden reversal. Was it truly a change of heart, or simply a strategic retreat to avoid public exposure? Either way, the outcome was what mattered. My grandchildren would know me, know their heritage. 2 days later, with the agreement signed and notarized, I stood beside Richard in his living room as Jackson and Emma were called in from the backyard. They bounded in with the energy only 5-year-olds possess, stopping short when they saw me standing there on a non-cleaning day. Martha? Emma said, confusion evident in her small features. Did you come to clean again? Richard knelt down to their level. Kids, I need to tell you something important. This isn't Martha. This is Eleanor. She's my mother, which makes her your grandmother. Jackson frowned. But Grandma is in Connecticut. That's Mommy's mother, Richard explained gently. This is Daddy's mother, your other grandmother. Emma studied my face with the intensity children reserve for important discoveries. Is that why you look like Daddy? Because you're his mommy? Yes, sweetheart, I said, my voice breaking. That's exactly why. But why did you tell us she was Martha? Jackson asked, his young mind wrestling with the deception. Richard glanced up at me, then back to his children. Because Daddy made a mistake, a big one. Sometimes grown-ups make wrong choices and then we have to fix them and tell the truth. Emma walked over, standing directly in front of me. So you're not our cleaning lady? You're our grandmother? I knelt down to her eye level. I am your grandmother. I've always been your grandmother. And I've loved you both since before you were born. Emma tilted her head, considering this new information. Then, with the straightforward acceptance only, children can manage, she nodded. Okay, can I still show you my drawings? I would love that more than anything, I whispered. Jackson joined his sister. If you're our grandma, do we have to call you Grandma now instead of Martha? You can call me whatever makes you comfortable, I assured him. But I would love to be your grandma. Grandma. Emma tried out the word, then smiled. I like that better than Martha. As the twins began bombarding me with questions, did I have cookies at my house? Did I know how to play their favorite games? Would I come to their birthday? I caught Richard's eye over their heads. There was regret there, and shame, but also relief. The weight of his deception had been lifted. Later, as I prepared to leave, Richard walked me to the door. "This doesn't fix everything," he acknowledged. "We have a lot of work to do, a lot of trust to rebuild." "We do," I agreed. But today was a start. For the first time in years, when I drove away from Richard's house, I didn't leave pieces of my heart behind. Instead, I carried with me new memories, new hope, and the knowledge that from this day forward, I would be known to my grandchildren by my rightful name, Grandma. The transition from Martha the cleaning lady to Grandma Eleanor wasn't seamless, despite the formal agreement and Richard's apparent change of heart. The twins had questions, endless questions that sometimes left me struggling for age-appropriate answers. "Why didn't you tell us you were our grandma before?" Jackson asked, one afternoon as we built a Lego tower in my apartment. It was our first official Grandma Day, a weekly arrangement outlined in the legal document Andrew had meticulously crafted. I paused, carefully selecting my words. Sometimes adults make complicated decisions, thinking they're doing what's best. Your daddy and I had different ideas about when you should meet me as your grandma. But you were already meeting us as Martha, Emma pointed out, her logical mind catching the inconsistency. Why couldn't you just be grandma instead? Out of the mouths of babes, their innocent questions cut to the heart of the absurdity better than any legal argument could have. That's a very good question, I acknowledged. And the honest answer is that grown-ups sometimes make things more complicated than they need to be. Emma seemed satisfied with this explanation, but Jackson's furrowed brow told me he was still processing. At 5, he was already showing signs of Richard's analytical mind. "Is that why you had that man with the papers come to our house?" he asked. "To stop being Martha and start being Grandma?" I hadn't realized Jackson had seen Andrew during his brief visit to deliver the final signed agreement. "Yes," I said simply. "Sometimes when grown-ups can't agree, they need help from people who know about rules and fairness." Like a referee, Jackson nodded, making the connection to his soccer games. Exactly like that. These conversations were delicate dances, requiring honesty without burdening the children with adult complexities. I was determined not to use this newfound relationship to turn the twins against their parents. Despite everything Richard and Melissa had done, the children needed to feel secure in their family, not caught in a tug-of-war of loyalty. Richard seemed to appreciate my restraint. During drop-offs and pickups, which he handled personally rather than sending the nanny, his initial awkwardness gradually eased into something resembling our old rapport. They couldn't stop talking about the bird feeder you helped them build. He mentioned one evening, lingering in my doorway after bringing the twins back from our day together. "Jackson's already planning where to hang it in our backyard." "They're natural builders," I replied, remembering how James had similar projects with Richard at that age. "Jackson reminds me so much of you at 5, the way his forehead scrunches when he's concentrating." Richard smiled faintly. "Dad used to call that my thinking machine face." "He did," I confirmed, surprised and pleased that Richard remembered such a detail. A comfortable silence settled between us, the first in years. Before he left, Richard hesitated, then asked, "Would you like to come for dinner this weekend? Nothing formal, just family dinner." The invitation marked another milestone in our cautious reconciliation. That Sunday, I arrived at their home, not through the service entrance I'd used as Martha, but through the front door, bearing a homemade apple pie, James's favorite. Melissa greeted me with practiced politeness. Her acceptance of my presence in their lives was clearly a concession to Richard rather than a personal change of heart. Still, she made efforts, setting the table with care and including photos of James she'd found in Richard's old belongings. Twins were asking about their grandfather, she explained, gesturing to a framed photo of James holding infant Richard. I thought it might be nice to have this out. The gesture, however calculated, touched me deeply. Thank you, Melissa. That means a lot. Dinner itself was a lively affair, with the twins eager to share their week's adventures. I watched Richard interact with his children, patient, engaged, loving, and saw echoes of James in every gesture. Whatever his failings toward me, he was a good father. As weeks turned into months, our new arrangement settled into a rhythm. My weekly grandma days expanded to include occasional weekends and holiday celebrations. The first Christmas after the agreement was awkward but meaningful, with my small apartment crowded with presents for the twins and the 4 stockings I'd knitted, including ones for Richard and Melissa. Richard's professional colleagues and their circle of friends gradually learned of my existence. I was introduced at school functions and children's birthday parties as Richard's mother without further explanation. If anyone wondered where I'd been all these years or noticed my less prestigious background, they were too polite to mention it. Melissa's parents, the official grandparents for so long, reacted to my emergence with chilly civility. During a Thanksgiving gathering at their Connecticut estate, my first invitation to a Stevens family event, Melissa's mother, Catherine, cornered me by the drink table. "So you're the mysterious other grandmother," she said, sipping her champagne. "The twins speak highly of you." "They're wonderful children," I replied neutrally. "I'm grateful to have them in my life." Catherine studied me with the assessing gaze of someone accustomed to social hierarchies. "Melissa mentioned you were a marketing director before retirement. How interesting." The slight emphasis on interesting told me all I needed to know about her assessment of my career compared to her husband's surgical practice. Yes, I worked while raising Richard. James and I both believed in the value of hard work. James was Richard's father, the factory manager? Plant manager, I corrected gently. He oversaw production operations for a manufacturing company that made medical equipment, as it happens, some of which your husband probably used in his practice. Catherine's expression flickered with surprise at the connection. How providential. We thought so. James was very proud of making components that helped save lives, even if he wasn't the one wielding the scalpel. She seemed unsure how to respond to my unapologetic embrace of our working-class background. Finally, she offered a tight smile. "Well, family history is important. The twins should know where they come from, all sides of their heritage." "I couldn't agree more," I replied, raising my glass slightly in acknowledgement. That exchange marked a turning point in my relationship with the Stevens family. Not friendship, certainly, but a grudging recognition of my place in the twins' lives. It was enough. As Emma and Jackson's 6th birthday approached, Richard called with an unexpected proposal. "Mom, we're planning their party at the house, but," I was thinking, "what about a special day, just you and them, to celebrate your first birthday together as official grandmother and grandchildren?" The thoughtfulness of his suggestion brought tears to my eyes. "I'd love that, Richard. Thank you." "Actually," he continued, hesitating in his voice, "I was wondering if I could join you. A day for the 4 of us, like we used to do for my birthdays when Dad was alive." Richard's request opened a door I thought permanently closed, an acknowledgement of our shared past, a desire to reclaim some of what we'd lost. "Your father would have loved that," I said softly. We planned a day that echoed traditions from Richard's childhood: breakfast at a local diner, a visit to the Natural History Museum, an afternoon at the park, and homemade birthday cake at my apartment. Nothing extravagant by the twins' usual standards, but meaningful in its simplicity. The night before our outing, Richard called again. "Mom, is it okay if Melissa joins us tomorrow? She's been asking questions about what my birthdays were like growing up, and I thought, well, it might be good for her to see this side of things." I hesitated. Melissa's presence would inevitably alter the dynamic I'd imagined, potentially inserting the very class consciousness that had driven the original wedge between Richard and me. Yet her interest seemed genuine, perhaps even a tentative olive branch. "Of course she's welcome," I finally said. "The more the merrier." When they arrived the next morning, I was surprised to see Melissa dressed in jeans and a simple sweater rather than her usual designer attire. The twins burst into my apartment with the energy of children anticipating adventure, while Richard and Melissa followed more sedately. "I hope you don't mind my crashing your tradition," Melissa said as Richard helped the children with their jackets. "Not at all. I'm glad you wanted to come." She lowered her voice slightly. "Richard's been talking more about his childhood lately, about your family traditions. They sound nice." The wistfulness in her tone caught me off guard. "They were nothing elaborate," I demurred, "just consistent, something Richard could count on." "That's what he said." Melissa glanced toward her husband, who was laughing with the twins. "Consistency, reliability. Those were his exact words." I began to understand something I'd missed in all our interactions. Melissa's privileged upbringing, for all its material advantages, might have lacked the emotional stability Richard had known. Her desire to curate her children's relationships might stem from her own childhood insecurities rather than mere snobbery. The day unfolded much as I'd planned. Pancakes at the diner where the owner still remembered Richard and greeted him like a returning son. Dinosaur exhibits that left the twins wide-eyed with wonder. Hours at the park flying kites Richard had helped them build the previous week. Throughout the day, I watched Melissa observing our interactions, sometimes participating, sometimes hanging back. At the playground, while Richard pushed the twins on swings, she sat beside me on a bench. "You never had a nanny for Richard?" she asked suddenly. "We couldn't afford one," I replied honestly. "We arranged our work schedules to minimize childcare needs. When that wasn't possible, my sister helped out. But your career, didn't it suffer?" "It developed differently than it might have otherwise," I acknowledged. "But we considered Richard our primary job. Everything else was secondary." Melissa absorbed this, watching her children laugh as Richard spun them higher. "My parents had staff for everything. Nannies, housekeepers, tutors. They were busy people with important commitments." There was no judgment in her tone, just a statement of fact, yet I heard the unspoken comparison. "Different families find different solutions," I offered. "There's no single right way to raise children." She nodded slowly. "I'm beginning to see that." Back at my apartment, I brought out the birthday cake I'd baked, chocolate with buttercream frosting, decorated with Lego figures I'd carefully saved from Richard's childhood collection. Nothing compared to the professional creations at the twins' official party, but their excitement was genuine. As we sang Happy Birthday, and the twins blew out their candles, I caught Richard watching me with an expression I hadn't seen in years. Unguarded affection mixed with something like regret. When our eyes met, he mouthed a silent "thank you" over the children's heads. That evening marked a genuine thaw in the glacial distance that had separated us for so long. Not an instant restoration of trust. Too much had happened for that. But a mutual acknowledgement that healing was possible, even desirable. Over the following year, our family dynamic continued to evolve. My apartment became a regular destination for the twins, sometimes with Richard, occasionally even with Melissa. I was invited to school performances, soccer games, piano recitals, no longer as Martha observing from the background, but as Grandma Eleanor, proudly taking pictures and offering congratulatory hugs. Richard and I established a weekly lunch date, just the two of us, gradually rebuilding our relationship conversation by conversation. We talked about James, about Richard's childhood, about the medical career that fulfilled him, but also consumed him. Sometimes we discussed difficult subjects, his shame about his background, my pain at being relegated to a domestic role. Other times, we simply enjoyed each other's company, rediscovering the easy rapport we'd once taken for granted. I spoke with Dr. Winters at the Hospital Foundation yesterday, Richard mentioned during one such lunch, nearly 14 months after our legal agreement. They're establishing a scholarship for underprivileged students interested in medical careers. I've agreed to chair the selection committee. That's wonderful, I replied, genuinely pleased. Your father would be proud. Actually, Richard continued, setting down his fork, I was hoping you might consider joining the committee. Your perspective would be valuable. You understand what it means to sacrifice for educational opportunities. The invitation represented more than committee work. It was Richard publicly acknowledging the values his upbringing had instilled, values he was now reclaiming rather than rejecting. I'd be honored, I said simply. On a crisp autumn day, nearly 2 years after the lawyer had secured my rightful place in my grandchildren's lives, I sat in the audience at Jackson and Emma's elementary school, waiting for the second-grade play to begin. Richard had saved me a seat in the family section, between himself and Melissa's father, who nodded cordially as I took my place. The kids are nervous, Richard whispered. Emma forgot her lines twice during breakfast rehearsal. She'll be wonderful, I assured him. You were the same way at her age, nervous beforehand but perfect once the curtain went up. Richard smiled at the memory. That Mother's Day play, Dad recorded the whole thing on that massive video camera. I still have the tape somewhere, I said. We should find it and show the twins. I'd like that, he replied, then added hesitantly, Mom, there's something I've been meaning to ask you. Melissa and I are considering a vacation next summer, 2 weeks in Europe. We were wondering if you might stay at the house with the kids while we're gone. The request, to trust me not as a housekeeper but as the primary caregiver for his children, felt like the final piece of our reconciliation falling into place. Of course I will, I said, patting his hand. They'll be well taken care of. I know they will. His voice grew serious. They love you, Mom. Not as Martha, not as some obligation they've been taught to respect, but as their grandmother, as you. Before I could respond, the lights dimmed, and the elementary school curtain creaked open to reveal a stage full of costumed second graders, including Emma as a sunflower and Jackson as a rain cloud. As the children began their performance, I felt Richard's hand close over mine in the darkness. The path from stranger to grandmother, from Martha to Eleanor, had been painful and unnecessarily complex. The legal documents that secured my place in my grandchildren's lives couldn't restore. The years of separation, the moments missed, the relationship damaged. But sitting in that auditorium, surrounded by family, complicated, imperfect, but family nonetheless, I understood that some journeys, however difficult, lead exactly where they need to go. Emma spotted me in the audience during her big solo, her face lighting up as she waved subtly in my direction. I waved back, a lump in my throat. Grandma's here, she whispered audibly to Jackson as they crossed paths during a scene change, loud enough to be heard in the first few rows. Yes, I thought, dabbing at my eyes as the children continued their performance. Grandma is here, and this time she's not going anywhere. Grandma, can you tell us another story about when Dad was little? Emma asked, snuggled against me on the couch in Richard and Melissa's home. It was a Friday evening, the start of my 2-week stay with the twins while their parents vacationed. In Europe, a trust I still marveled at, considering where we'd been just 3 years earlier. Jackson looked up from the floor where he was arranging dominoes in an intricate pattern. Yeah, tell us about when he got in trouble. Those are the best ones. I laughed, pulling Emma closer. Your father was actually a very well-behaved child, but there was this one time when he was 8. The twins leaned forward eagerly as I launched into the tale of Richard's short-lived career as a neighborhood entrepreneur, when he'd collected items from neighbors' garbage and held a sidewalk sale, requiring James and me to facilitate hasty apologies and returns. Did he get grounded? Jackson asked hopefully. We didn't ground him, but he had to write apology notes to everyone and do extra chores for 2 weeks. Emma giggled. Dad said you and Grandpa James were strict. Fair, I corrected gently. We tried to be fair. The easy way the twins now referred to James as Grandpa, despite never having met him, warmed my heart. Richard had been diligent about incorporating James's memory into their lives, sharing stories, displaying photos, even taking them to visit his grave on Father's Day, placing small stones the twins had painted atop the headstone. My relationship with the twins had flourished over the 3 years since the legal confrontation. At 8, they were curious, insightful, and increasingly aware of the complex dynamics that had shaped our family. Their questions grew more penetrating as their understanding matured. Dad said he made a big mistake about you being our cleaning lady, Jackson had commented recently. Why did he do that? Didn't he want us to know you were our grandma? Such questions required careful navigation, honesty without undermining their relationship with their parents. Your dad was trying to figure out how to balance many different things in his life, I'd explained. Sometimes when people are uncertain, they make choices they later regret. The twins seemed to accept this explanation, their natural resilience allowing them to embrace the truth of our family without dwelling on the painful parts. Children, I'd discovered, were remarkably adaptable when given the chance. The night, before Richard and Melissa were due to return from their European trip, I sat at their kitchen table reviewing the calendar I'd maintained during their absence. Soccer practices, piano lessons, play dates, and dentist appointments, all meticulously documented. The house was spotless, the refrigerator stocked, the laundry done, not because I was playing housekeeper again, but because this was what family did for each other. As I checked off the final items on my list, my phone rang. Andrew Pearson, the lawyer who had helped restore my place in my grandchildren's lives. Eleanor, how are you? His familiar voice brought a smile to my face. Andrew, what a surprise. I'm doing well. Just finished up a 2-week grandma marathon while Richard and Melissa are in Europe. That's actually why I'm calling. I was meeting with the family court judge who oversaw your case, Judge Harmon, at a legal conference last week. She remembered your situation and asked about you. When I mentioned you were now regularly caring for your grandchildren, she was delighted. She said yours was one of the success stories she remembers fondly. That's kind of her, I replied, touched that a judge who must see hundreds of cases would remember mine. It got me thinking, Andrew continued. I've been putting together a panel discussion on grandparents' rights for the State Bar Association's Family Law Conference. Would you consider sharing your experience? It could help other grandparents in similar situations, and maybe even encourage some attorneys to take on these cases. The request caught me off guard. My natural instinct was to protect my privacy, to keep our family's difficult journey to ourselves. But I thought of those 3 painful years as Martha, the cleaning lady, and how alone I had felt. What would it involve? I asked cautiously. A 20-minute talk about your experience, followed by a Q&A session. Very controlled environment. All legal professionals interested in family law. No media. I considered the possibility. I'd need to discuss it with Richard. This isn't just my story. Of course, Andrew agreed. The conference is 3 months away. Take your time. When Richard and Melissa returned, sun-tanned and relaxed from their European adventure, the twins tackled them with enthusiasm, chattering about all they'd done in their parents' absence. I hung back, giving them space for reunion, until Richard broke away to embrace me. Everything go okay? He asked. Perfect, I assured him. They're wonderful children. Later, after the twins were in bed and Melissa had retreated to unpack, Richard and I sat in the kitchen sharing a pot of tea. They asked a lot of questions about your childhood, I told him. They're trying to piece together the family history. Richard nodded, turning his mug in his hands. That's good. They should know. Where they come from. He paused, then added, I've been thinking about that a lot lately, about heritage, about what we pass down to our children beyond genetics, such as values, perspectives. He met my gaze directly, the ability to see worth in people regardless of their social position or bank account. I remained silent, sensing he had more to say. In Italy, we visited this tiny restaurant in Florence, family-owned for generations. The grandmother was still in the kitchen at 80-something, teaching recipes to her grandchildren. The whole family worked together, sharing a simple meal, before opening for dinner service. He smiled at the memory. It reminded me of Sunday dinners when Dad was alive, how we'd all help with dishes afterward. Your father believed strongly in the dignity of work, I said. Any work done well. No? Richard's voice softened. I forgot that somewhere along the way, or maybe I decided it wasn't sophisticated enough for the life I was building. He shook his head. I wasted so much time being embarrassed by things I should have been proud of. Andrew's invitation came to mind. Richard, I received an interesting call while you were away. My lawyer wants me to speak at a legal conference about our situation, about grandparents' rights. I wanted to discuss it with you before deciding. I explained the nature of the panel, watching his reaction carefully. Rather than the resistance I half expected, Richard appeared thoughtful. Would it help other families avoid what we went through? He asked finally. That's the idea, to raise awareness about these issues among family law practitioners. Richard nodded slowly. Then I think you should do it. With one condition. What's that? I want to attend. Not to speak, it's your story to tell, but to be there, to show support. His offer moved me deeply. You don't have to do that. I know. I want to. 3 months later, I stood at a podium in a hotel conference room, facing an audience of attorneys and family court judges. My prepared remarks told the story of our family's journey, from my relegation to Martha, through the legal intervention that restored my rightful place. I spoke of the pain of separation, the complexity of reconciliation, and the joy of genuine integration into my grandchildren's lives. What I hadn't prepared for was Richard's decision to speak as well. As the moderator opened the floor for questions, Richard approached the second microphone set up for audience members. I'm Dr. Richard Mitchell, he began, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his face. I'm Eleanor's son. I'm also the person who created the situation that required legal intervention. A murmur ran through the audience as they realized they were hearing from the other side of this case study. I wanted to add my perspective, if that's permitted, Richard continued, glancing at the moderator, who nodded encouragement. When my mother's lawyer arrived with those documents, I was angry. I felt cornered, exposed. I was focused entirely on how her actions would affect me, my reputation, my carefully constructed life. What I couldn't see then was the gift she was giving not just to herself or my children but to me. Richard's voice cracked slightly. By fighting for her place in our family, my mother also fought for my integrity, for the reconnection to values I had abandoned in pursuit of social acceptance. She forced me to confront the man I had become versus the man my parents raised. Me to be? The room had fallen completely silent, every legal professional present seemingly captivated by this unexpected testimony. I'm a cardiologist, Richard continued. I repair physical hearts, but my mother's courage helped repair something deeper, the connection between my past and present, between who I am and where I came from. My children now know their grandmother, their heritage, and the value of honest work and unconditional love. He turned toward me, our eyes meeting across the room. The legal documents that started this process were necessary because I failed to recognize what was right in front of me. But the healing that followed couldn't have been mandated by any court. That required forgiveness, my mother's forgiveness of my profound selfishness. As Richard returned to his seat, I struggled to maintain my composure. The moderator, sensing the emotional weight of the moment, suggested a short break before the Q&A portion. In the hallway outside, Richard found me by the water fountain. "I hope that was okay," he said. "I hadn't planned to speak, but sitting there, listening to you tell our story so graciously..." I embraced him, words temporarily beyond me. When I could finally speak, I managed only, "Your father would be so proud of the man you've become." That panel discussion led to unexpected opportunities. Andrew began referring grandparents in similar situations to me for peer support. I started an informal support group that met monthly in a community center near my apartment. I wasn't a legal expert or therapist, just someone who had walked the difficult path from exclusion to inclusion and could offer a map to others making the same journey. Richard sometimes joined these meetings, offering the perspective of the gatekeeper parent who had come to recognize the damage his actions had caused. His medical credentials and social standing lent weight to his testimony, particularly with families from privileged backgrounds similar to his own. "The irony," he commented after one such session, "is that I was trying to give my children advantages by limiting their connections. Now I realize how much I was depriving them of by erasing half their heritage." As the twins entered third grade, I found myself increasingly integrated into the fabric of their lives. No longer an outside observer, I was now a field trip chaperone, a cookie baker for class parties, a familiar face at school events. The other parents and teachers knew me as Dr. Mitchell's mother, or Emma and Jackson's grandmother. Introductions that never failed to fill me with quiet satisfaction. Melissa, too, had evolved in her attitude toward me. While we would never share the easy closeness of lifelong friends, we had developed a mutual respect based on our shared love for the twins and Richard. "The children's school is hosting a grandparents' luncheon next month," she mentioned during a family dinner at my apartment. "My parents can't make it. They'll be in Aspen. Would you be able to attend?" "I'd be delighted," I replied, recognizing the invitation as more than a scheduling convenience. It was an acknowledgement of my place in the family hierarchy. On a brisk October morning, I joined dozens of other grandparents in the school cafeteria, decorated with fall crafts created by the students. The twins proudly showed me to their designated table, where placemats they'd made displayed carefully drawn family trees, complete with pictures of James they'd copied from photographs, and, I noticed with a lump in my throat, accurate labels, identifying him as Grandpa James, Dad's dad, and me as Grandma Eleanor, Dad's mom. "We put all our grandparents," Emma explained, "even the ones in heaven." As the children performed songs and presented handmade gifts to their grandparents, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this ordinary yet extraordinary moment. The legal documents that had initiated our reconciliation were now stored in a file cabinet, rarely referenced. What mattered weren't the papers but the relationships they had helped restore. Relationships that continued to grow and evolve in ways I couldn't have imagined during those painful years as Martha. After the luncheon, as I was helping Jackson into his coat, his teacher approached. "Mrs. Mitchell, I just wanted to mention how beautifully Jackson wrote about you for our family heritage project. His essay about learning to make his grandfather's apple pie recipe with you was really touching." The simple comment, and the casual use of my name, as if my presence in Jackson's life was the most natural thing in the world, brought tears to my eyes. "Thank you," I managed. Baking was something special I shared with my husband. It means a lot to pass those traditions to the next generation. That evening, I called Richard. "Jackson wrote an essay about making Grandpa's apple pie," I told him. "His teacher mentioned it at the luncheon today. He's been talking about that pie for weeks." Richard chuckled. "He told me it tastes like history in your mouth." I'm not entirely sure what he meant by that, but he seemed very profound about it. I laughed, picturing Jackson's serious expression as he delivered this assessment. "I think I know what he means. Some tastes connect you to the past in a very tangible way. Mom, Richard's voice grew serious. I've been thinking about the house. It's getting too small for us. The twins need more space as they get older. And Melissa wants a dedicated home office now that she's joined the hospital foundation board. You're looking to move? I asked, surprised. Their current home seemed more than adequate, at least by my standards. Actually, we found a property we love. It has a separate guest house. Not huge, but completely private. 1 bedroom, full kitchen, living area. He paused meaningfully. We were thinking you might consider selling your apartment and taking the guest house. You'd have your independence, but you'd be right there for family dinners, impromptu visits with the twins. The offer rendered me momentarily speechless. After years of being kept at arm's length, to be invited to live on their property represented a level of integration I hadn't dared hope for. You don't have to decide right away, Richard added quickly. Just think about it. We'd love having you closer, but I understand if you prefer your own space. Actually, I said, finding my voice, I don't need time to think about it. Yes, I'd love that arrangement. 6 months later, I watched movers carry the last of my furniture into the charming guest house behind Richard and Melissa's new home. The twins darted excitedly between the main house and my space, already planning movie nights and baking sessions. As twilight fell, I sat on my small porch, savoring the quiet. Richard joined me, 2 glasses of wine in hand. Happy with the move? He asked, handing me a glass. Very, I assured him. It feels right. We sat in comfortable silence, watching fireflies begin to appear in the gathering dusk. After a while, Richard spoke again, his voice reflective. I was thinking about those legal documents today, the ones Andrew brought to the house that day. They seemed so threatening then, like weapons aimed at our family. Now I see them differently. How? So? I asked. They weren't weapons at all. They were invitations. Invitations to be honest, to be whole, to be the family we were always meant to be. He raised his glass slightly. To legal documents that heal instead of divide. I clinked my glass against his, adding my own toast. And to cleaning ladies who turn out to be grandmothers. Richard's laughter joined mine in the evening air, the sound reaching through the open windows of the main house where Melissa was helping the twins prepare a welcome dinner for their grandmother, their real grandmother, who would never again be just the help. Life in the guest house behind Richard and Melissa's home quickly became my new normal. The arrangement offered the perfect balance, my own space and independence, with the joy of family just steps away. Mornings often began with the twins bursting through my door, still in pajamas, asking for pancakes or help with homework they'd procrastinated on. Evenings frequently ended with family dinners, board games, or quiet conversations on the patio as the children played in the expansive backyard. We should have done this years ago, Richard commented one evening as we watched Emma and Jackson construct an elaborate fort from branches, blankets, and string lights. Melissa had been called to an emergency hospital foundation meeting, leaving the 3 of us to enjoy a relaxed dinner of takeout pizza. Everything happens when it's meant to, I replied, having made peace with our difficult journey. The twins wouldn't appreciate this arrangement the same way if they hadn't lived through the alternative. Richard glanced at me, a hint of the old guilt crossing his features. You're very forgiving. Not forgiving, I corrected gently. Just forward-looking. What would holding on to resentment accomplish? Besides, I gestured toward the twins, now arguing good-naturedly about the fort's architectural integrity. Look what we might have missed. The twins were 9 now, their personalities developing distinct contours. Emma, artistic and empathetic, filled sketchbooks with drawings and wrote stories featuring heroines who rescued their families from various predicaments. Jackson, methodical and curious, disassembled household appliances to understand their workings and constructed complex Lego structures without instructions. They had both inherited Richard's intelligence and drive, but tempered with a compassion I like to think came partly from my influence. The cold ambition that had characterized Richard's relationship with Melissa in their early years had softened in their children, perhaps because the twins had been raised with a broader spectrum of values than Richard initially intended. My support group for grandparents seeking family reconnection had grown significantly, expanding from informal meetings at the community center to a structured organization with legal advisors, including Andrew Pearson, who offered pro bono consultations once a month. We called it Bridge Builders, a name suggested by Emma when she overheard me discussing our mission. Because you're building bridges between grandparents and grandchildren, she'd explained with 9-year-old wisdom, and bridges help people get to places they couldn't reach before. Richard's occasional participation in our meetings evolved into a regular commitment. His perspective as a parent who had initially resisted grandparent involvement proved invaluable to our members, many of whom were struggling to understand their adult children's resistance. It wasn't about my mother, he would explain to frustrated grandparents. It was about me, my insecurities, my misplaced priorities. Your children might be experiencing similar conflicts that have nothing to do with your worth as grandparents. His insights helped shift the conversation from accusation to understanding, from legal demands to compassionate connection. Gradually, our success stories multiplied. Grandparents reintegrated into families, relationships healed, bridges built. One unexpected outcome of our advocacy work was a documentary proposal from a filmmaker who specialized in family dynamics. Allison Cooper had attended one of our public information sessions after her own mother was denied access to her grandchildren, following a contentious divorce. Your story needs to reach more people, she told me over coffee after the meeting. The legal aspects are important, but it's the emotional journey that will resonate with viewers. How you went from cleaning lady to grandmother, from exclusion to belonging. My initial reaction was hesitation. Our family had already been through so much public scrutiny through the legal proceedings and subsequent speaking engagements. Did we need to expose ourselves further? I'd need to discuss this with my son and his family, I explained. This isn't just my story to tell. Allison nodded understanding. Of course. The documentary would involve interviews with everyone willing to participate. You, your son, even his wife and the children if appropriate. It would be a collaborative process. That evening, I broached the subject with Richard and Melissa during our weekly family dinner. To my surprise, Melissa was the first to respond positively. I think it could help a lot of families, she said, passing the salad bowl to Richard. Especially those from backgrounds similar to ours. Richard raised an eyebrow. Similar to ours? You know what I mean, Melissa replied, her tone matter-of-fact rather than defensive. Families where class differences or social expectations create artificial barriers. Families like ours were. The simple acknowledgement of our past dynamics, spoken, without rancor or blame, demonstrated how far we'd come. Melissa's evolution from social gatekeeper to advocate for family inclusion had been among the most unexpected developments of our journey. What about the twins? I asked. Would they be involved? We could ask them, Richard suggested. They're old enough to understand the basics of what happened and to decide if they want to participate. That night, as the family gathered in the living room, Richard explained the documentary proposal in age-appropriate terms. Someone wants to make a video about how Grandma Eleanor became part of our family, he began. About how she used to be Martha the cleaning lady and then became Grandma again. Jackson's brow furrowed. Would people watch that? Some would, Melissa answered honestly. People who are having similar problems in their families. It might help them. Emma, ever perceptive, looked directly at me. Would you have to talk about the sad parts? About when Dad made you be Martha instead of Grandma? Some of that would be part of the story, I admitted. But mostly it would be about how we worked things out and became a proper family again. The twins exchanged one of their silent communications, the twin telepathy that sometimes made words unnecessary between them. "I think we should do it," Emma announced, clearly speaking for both of them. "But only if we can talk about Grandpa. James, too. People should know about him." Jackson nodded agreement. "Yeah, he's part of the story too, even if he's in heaven." And so our family embarked on a new chapter, documenting our journey from estrangement to reconciliation. Allison's approach was thoughtful and sensitive, conducting individual interviews with each family member, including the twins, whose perspectives proved surprisingly insightful. "I remember being confused," Emma told the camera during her interview. Grandma, would look sad sometimes when she didn't think. We were watching. I didn't understand why a cleaning lady would be sad about us." Jackson's recollections were more concrete. "She cleaned differently than our new cleaning service does. She folded my t-shirts with the picture showing, and she always remembered which stuffed animals were supposed to go where on my bed. Real. Cleaning ladies don't care about that stuff." Melissa's interview revealed aspects of her thinking I'd never fully understood. "I grew up with very clear social hierarchies," she explained. "My parents had specific ideas about who belonged in our circle and who didn't. I internalized those values without questioning them." She paused before adding, "What I didn't realize was that those artificial boundaries were depriving my children of something irreplaceable, a grandmother who loved them unconditionally." Richard's interview was perhaps the most difficult for me to watch during the rough-cut screening. He spoke candidly about his gradual rejection of his working-class roots, his desire to belong in Melissa's social world, and the compartmentalization that allowed him to reconcile hiring his mother as household help while pretending she was a stranger. "I created elaborate justifications," he admitted. "I told myself it was temporary, that it was actually a kindness to give my mother access to her grandchildren in any capacity. But the truth was simpler and uglier. I was ashamed of where I came from and, by extension, ashamed of the woman who raised me." My own interviews focused less on blame and more on the emotional experience of living a double life, being both Martha and Eleanor, present yet invisible, connected yet estranged. The hardest part, I shared, wasn't the cleaning work itself. It was hearing my grandchildren call me by another name, watching them grow up without knowing who I really was to them. Every Martha was a reminder of what had been taken from us, our shared history, our natural bond. The documentary, titled From Martha to Grandma, A Family Reclaimed, premiered at a small film festival focused on family issues. We attended. As a family, the twins dressed in their Sunday best, visibly proud to be part of something they considered important. As we watched our story unfold on screen, the painful separation, the legal intervention, the gradual healing, I felt Richard's hand close over mine in the darkened theater. On my other side, Melissa reached across to squeeze my arm during particularly emotional moments. The film ended with footage of our current arrangement, the twins running between the main house and my guest house, family dinners on the patio, Emma showing me her latest artwork, Jackson and I working on a science project at my kitchen table. Ordinary moments made extraordinary by the journey required to reach them. During the Q&A session afterward, a woman in the audience directed a question to Richard. "After everything that happened, do you regret the legal action your mother took? Do you wish she had accepted the situation as it was?" Richard stepped to the microphone, his response unhesitating. "The legal documents my mother's lawyer brought that day were the best thing that could have happened to our family. They forced me to confront the man I had become and set us on a path to an authentic relationship." He glanced at me before adding, "My only regret is that she needed lawyers and court orders to secure what should have been freely given, her rightful place in her grandchildren's lives." The documentary gained unexpected traction, screening at additional festivals and eventually being picked up by a streaming service focused on social issues. Our inbox is filled with messages from grandparents in similar situations, from adult children reconsidering family estrangements, even from family court judges and legislators interested in strengthening grandparents' rights laws. You've started something important, Andrew Pearson told me when we met for coffee to discuss the film's impact. Legislators in 3 states have reached out about using the documentary in committee hearings on family law reform. It wasn't what I expected when I walked into your office 5 years ago, I admitted. I just wanted to see my grandchildren as myself, not as Martha. Andrew smiled. The most significant changes often begin with the simplest human desires: to be known, to be connected, to be ourselves with the people we love. As the twins approached their 10th birthday, Richard proposed a family vacation, our first extended trip together. I was thinking about the Grand Canyon, he suggested. Dad always wanted to see it, remember? We never managed to make that trip when I was growing up. The mention of James's unfulfilled wish touched me deeply. He would love knowing his grandchildren got to experience it. Planning the trip became a family project, with the twins researching hiking trails suitable for their age group and Melissa investigating lodging options. I found myself in charge of meal planning and picnic preparations, practical contributions that drew on skills honed during decades of family management. 2 weeks before our departure date, a package arrived for the twins. A surprise from Catherine and Harold Stevens, Melissa's parents. Inside were high-end hiking backpacks, water bottles, and outdoor gear for the Grand Canyon trip. That was thoughtful of your parents, I commented to Melissa as the twins excitedly tried on their new equipment. They're trying, Melissa acknowledged. The documentary affected them more than I expected. Mom called afterward and asked if they could watch it together with me. I think they recognized themselves in some of our early attitudes. Stevens's gesture represented another bridge being built, not just between grandparents and grandchildren, but between 2 family cultures that had once seemed irreconcilable. The working-class values James and I had embodied and the privileged perspective of Melissa's upbringing were finding common ground in the next generation. Our Grand Canyon vacation provided the perfect backdrop for this evolving family narrative. Standing at the rim, gazing into the vast ancient chasm, the petty social distinctions that had once divided us seemed laughably insignificant. Nature has a way of putting human concerns into proper perspective. Grandpa James would have loved this, Jackson declared, carefully adjusting his new binoculars to spot a distant eagle. Do you think he can see it from heaven? I bet he has the best view of all, I replied, wrapping an arm around his shoulders. That evening, gathered around a campfire at our cabin complex, Richard raised his water bottle in a toast. To family trips, may this be the first of many. And, to Grandpa James, Emma added solemnly, who's with us even though we can't see him. And to Martha, Jackson chimed in with a mischievous grin, who turned out to be our grandma in disguise. The family laughed together, the reference to our difficult past now transformed into a private joke rather than a painful memory. Time and honest reconciliation had worked their healing magic, allowing us to acknowledge our journey without being defined by its darkest chapters. On our final night at the Grand Canyon, Richard and I sat on the porch of our rental cabin long after the others had gone to bed. The desert sky sprawled above us, stars scattered across the darkness like diamonds on velvet. I've been thinking about legacy, Richard said quietly, about what I'm passing on to the twins. You're giving them a good life, I assured him. Opportunities, education, stability. Dad gave me those things too, in his way, Richard replied. But there was something else, something I nearly lost. He gave me a sense of integrity, of being the same person in every situation, regardless of who was watching or what advantage might be gained by pretending to be someone else. He turned to face me in the starlight. When I asked you to be Martha instead of Grandma Eleanor, I wasn't just asking you to change your name. I was asking you to participate in a fundamental dishonesty that would have shaped who the twins became. But they didn't become that, I reminded him. Thanks to those legal documents and your willingness to change course, they're growing up knowing the whole truth about their family, the comfortable parts and the uncomfortable ones. Richard nodded, his expression thoughtful. The irony is that I thought I was protecting them from complexity, from the messy reality of our family history. But children don't need protection from the truth. They need adults brave enough to model honesty, even when it's difficult. As we sat in companionable silence, watching the stars wheel slowly overhead, I reflected on our extraordinary journey. From the pain of separation to the joy of reconnection, from the humiliation of serving as Martha to the dignity of being recognized as Grandma Eleanor. The legal documents that had initiated our reconciliation had long since been filed away. Their formal language and court stamps no longer needed to secure my place in my grandchildren's lives. What remained was something both simpler and more profound: the natural bond between grandmother and grandchildren, nurtured by daily presence, shared experiences, and unguarded affection. "You know," Richard said, breaking the comfortable silence, "the twins asked if we could make this an annual tradition, coming to the Grand Canyon to remember Dad." "I'd like that," I replied. "James would be honored." "He'd be proud of you, Mom," Richard said softly, "for fighting for your place in their lives, for not giving up on me even when I gave you every reason to." I reached over to squeeze his hand. That's what parents do, and grandparents too. As we sat beneath the vast desert sky, I felt a sense of completion, of wholeness restored. The painful chapter of Martha the cleaning lady had been transformed into a story of resilience, reconciliation, and the enduring power of family bonds. My grandchildren knew me now, not as the help, but as their grandmother. Not as a stranger, but as the keeper of their family history, the link to their roots, the guardian of traditions that would outlive us all. From Martha to Grandma Eleanor, from estrangement to belonging, from legal documents to embraced identity. The journey had been difficult, but the destination, this moment of authentic connection, made every painful step worthwhile. "Grandma, we need your help with something important," Emma announced one afternoon, bursting into my guest house with Jackson close behind. At 12, the twins had entered that fascinating preteen phase, still children in many ways, but with flashes of the young adults they would soon become. "What kind of help?" I asked, setting aside the newsletter I'd been editing for our Bridge Builders organization, which had now expanded to chapters in 3 states. "It's for our family history project," Jackson explained. "We're supposed to create a visual timeline of significant family events going back at least 2 generations. Emma spread a large poster board across my kitchen table. "We've got most of Mom's side from Grandma Catherine, but we need more details about your side, especially about Grandpa James." I smiled at their earnestness. "I'm happy to help. Where would you like to start?" "From the beginning," Emma said, decisively. "Like, when were you born, and where, and how did you meet Grandpa James?" For the next 2 hours, we sat at my kitchen table, the twins recording dates and events on their timeline as I shared stories of my childhood in a small Pennsylvania town, meeting James at a community college dance, our simple wedding, and Richard's birth. I showed them photographs I'd preserved: James in his work uniform, Richard's first steps, family picnics at the local park. "And this," I said, pulling out a faded newspaper clipping, "was when your grandfather received an award for suggesting improvements to the manufacturing process at his plant. His ideas saved the company thousands of dollars and made the assembly line safer for workers." Jackson studied the grainy image. "He looks like Dad around the eyes." "He does," I agreed. "Your father has his analytical mind too, the ability to see problems and their solutions clearly." "Is this when Dad was in medical school?" Emma asked, pointing to a photo of a much younger Richard in a white coat, his arm around an equally young Melissa. "Yes, their first year. They'd just started dating." The twins exchanged glances. "That's when things started changing, right?" Emma asked carefully. "Between you and Dad?" Their awareness of our family's complicated history no longer surprised me. The documentary and our subsequent openness had created an environment where they felt safe asking direct questions about our past difficulties. Yes, I acknowledged. Your father was entering a different world then, one very different from how he grew up. Many things changed during that period. Is that why you became Martha instead of Grandma when we were little? Jackson's question was straightforward, without accusation. It's part of the reason, I replied honestly. Your parents and I had different ideas about family at that time. We needed to work through those differences. Emma frowned thoughtfully. But why didn't you just tell us who you were anyway, even if Dad told you not to? The question caught me off guard. Not because I hadn't considered it myself over the years, but because it came from my grandchild's genuine curiosity rather than an adult's judgment. That's a fair question, I said after a moment. I could have. But I believed it was better for you to have me in your lives as Martha than not at all. And I hoped eventually your father would change his mind, which he did. Because of the lawyer. And the documents, Jackson stated matter-of-factly. The legal intervention helped, I acknowledged. But what really mattered was your father reconnecting with the values he'd been raised with. Honesty, integrity, recognizing the worth of all people regardless of their social position. Emma nodded sagely. Like in the documentary. Exactly. Like that. The twins incorporated these insights into their timeline, creating a visual representation of our family's journey. Not just births, deaths, and marriages, but the emotional milestones that had shaped us. Grandma Eleanor becomes Martha. Lawyer brings documents. Grandma's true identity revealed. Family reunited. When Richard arrived to pick them up for dinner, they proudly displayed their work. This is remarkable, he said, studying the detailed timeline. You've really captured our family story. Even the complicated parts, Emma pointed out. Richard nodded, his expression thoughtful. Especially those. They're just as important as the happy ones, maybe more so. The twins' family history project received the highest grade in their class, and their teacher asked if they would present it at the school's Family Heritage Day. This annual event had traditionally featured displays of cultural traditions, ethnic foods, and immigrant stories from diverse family backgrounds. Our contribution would be something different, a story of family division and reconciliation spanning socioeconomic rather than cultural divides. Are you comfortable with them sharing our story so publicly? I asked Richard and Melissa over dinner that evening. I think we moved past privacy concerns when we agreed to the documentary, Melissa replied pragmatically. Besides, they're proud of their project. They should have the opportunity to present it. Richard nodded agreement. The twins have never shown any embarrassment about our family history. If anything, they see it as something that makes us unique. Family. Heritage Day arrived on a crisp autumn morning. The school gymnasium had been transformed with displays representing dozens of cultural backgrounds: Norwegian recipes, Chinese calligraphy, Nigerian traditional clothing, Irish music. Amid this celebration of ethnic diversity, the twins' presentation stood out for its focus on a different kind of heritage, the complex interplay of class, ambition, and family bonds that had shaped our American experience. Standing beside their detailed timeline, Emma and Jackson took turns explaining our family's journey to clusters of interested parents, teachers, and classmates. They spoke matter-of-factly about the Martha period, as they now called it, neither minimizing its significance nor dwelling on its painful aspects. Our dad thought Grandma Eleanor wouldn't fit into their new life, Jackson explained to one group. So he told us she was just our cleaning lady. But she was really our grandmother all along, Emma added. She just couldn't tell us until her lawyer brought special documents that made it official. Their simple explanation captured the essence of our complicated situation better than any adult account could have. Watching them, I felt a surge of pride. not just in their poise and articulateness, but in their ability to speak truthfully about difficult subjects without shame or resentment. During a break in the presentations, their social studies teacher approached me. "Your grandchildren have created something quite powerful," she said. "We focus so much on cultural heritage that we sometimes overlook these other types of family stories." "They've helped us all see it more clearly," I acknowledged. Children have a way of cutting through complications to the heart of things. After the event, our family gathered at a local restaurant to celebrate the twins' successful presentation. As we waited for our meals, Richard raised his water glass in a toast. "To Emma and Jackson," he said, "for teaching us all how to tell our story with honesty and grace. And to Grandma Eleanor," Emma added, lifting her glass, "for never giving up on us, even when you had to be Martha." Jackson completed the toast in his practical way. "And to that lawyer with the documents who fixed everything." We all laughed, including Melissa, who had come to see the legal intervention as the necessary catalyst for our family's healing, rather than an attack on her carefully constructed social world. Later that evening, as Richard walked me back to my guest house, he mentioned casually, "I saw Andrew Pearson last week at a hospital fundraiser. He asked about you." "Oh?" I replied, surprised. Although Andrew remained connected to our Bridge Builders organization as a legal advisor, our personal contact had diminished over the years as our case receded into the past. "He's been appointed to a state commission on family law reform," Richard explained. "They're reviewing grandparents' rights statutes, among other things. He mentioned he'd like your input, if you're interested." "I might be," I said thoughtfully. "There's still work to be done in that area." Richard smiled. "From Martha to advocate for grandparents everywhere. Quite a journey." "Not one I would have chosen," I admitted, "but perhaps one I was meant to make." As we reached my door, Richard hesitated, then asked, "Do you ever regret it?" "Taking legal action, I mean." It couldn't have been an easy decision. I considered his question seriously. "I regret that it was necessary. I regret the years we lost before that point. But the action itself? No. Without those documents, without that formal intervention, we might never have found our way back to being a real family." Richard nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Sometimes the hardest paths lead to the best destinations. And sometimes," I added, thinking of the twins' straightforward presentation of our complicated story, "our children lead us there, even when they don't realize they're showing the way." As Richard walked back to the main house, I stood for a moment under the star-filled sky, reflecting on our extraordinary journey. From Martha the cleaning lady to Grandma Eleanor, from legal adversaries to a unified family, from shame and secrecy to honest acceptance of our complete story. The legal documents that had initiated our reconciliation were now just a small part of our family narrative, a necessary chapter but not the most important one. What mattered more were the bonds we'd rebuilt, the trust we'd restored, and the legacy of authenticity we were creating for the next generation. The twins would grow up knowing both sides of their heritage, the privilege of Melissa's background and the working-class values of mine and James's. They would understand that worth isn't determined by social status or financial success. Most importantly, they would carry forward the hard-won knowledge that families can heal, that mistakes can be acknowledged and corrected, and that love, when given the chance, can bridge even the widest divides, from Martha to Grandma Eleanor, from estrangement to belonging, from legal documents to living legacy. Our story continues. 7 years had passed since Andrew Pearson walked into Richard and Melissa's home with the legal documents that transformed our family. The twins were now 15, no longer children, but emerging young adults with distinct personalities, passions, and perspectives on the world. Emma had developed into a talented artist whose work often explored themes of identity and connection. Her latest series of paintings, displayed in her high school's spring art show, featured paired portraits, one of Richard standing beside James's grave, another of herself with me in my garden, a third of Jackson with Richard in matching surgical scrubs during a hospital shadow day. "It's about heritage," she explained when I asked about the series, "about the visible and invisible threads that connect us across generations." Jackson, meanwhile, had inherited both Richard's analytical mind and James's mechanical aptitude. His bedroom had become a workshop of half-disassembled computers, circuit boards, and engineering prototypes. Where Richard had channeled his intelligence into medicine, Jackson seemed destined for engineering or perhaps robotics, fields that combined theory and practical application in ways that satisfied both sides of his heritage. As for me, the unexpected journey from Martha to Grandma Eleanor had evolved into something I never anticipated: a second career as an advocate for grandparents' rights. What began with our Bridge Builders support group had expanded into consulting work with family law committees, speaking engagements at legal conferences, and eventually, an appointment to a state commission tasked with modernizing family court procedures. "We need your lived experience on this committee," the chairperson had explained when offering me the position. "Academic knowledge and legal expertise are valuable, but there's no substitute for someone who has actually navigated these waters." My appointment to the commission coincided with a significant milestone: the 10th anniversary of our family's reconciliation. Richard suggested we mark the occasion in a meaningful way. "Not a celebration exactly," he clarified during a family dinner. "More like a commemoration, acknowledging how far we've come and what we've learned along the way." "What did you have in mind?" Melissa asked, passing the salad to Emma. "I was thinking about a family retreat," Richard replied. "Somewhere quiet where we could reflect together. Maybe invite a few people who were significant in our journey." "Like Mr. Pearson?" Jackson suggested, referencing Andrew, who had remained loosely connected to our family over the years. "Exactly," Richard nodded. "And perhaps a few families from Bridge Builders who've gone through similar reconciliations." The idea evolved into a weekend gathering at a lakeside retreat center. Not a large event, but an intentional coming together of people who understood the complex terrain of family, estrangement, and reunion. 5 families who had found their way back to each other through Bridge Builders joined us, along with Andrew Pearson and Judge Harmon, who had overseen our original case and later became a staunch advocate for grandparents' rights in her courtroom. The retreat center, a converted lodge surrounded by pine trees and overlooking a serene lake, provided the perfect setting for reflection. Some sessions were structured: panel discussions on family healing, workshops on legislative reforms needed to support family reunification. Others were informal: nature walks, communal meals, evening gatherings around a fire pit where stories flowed as freely as conversation. On the second evening, after dinner, our group gathered in the main lodge. Richard had arranged a surprise, a documentary screening, but not our own. This film, created by a family who had found Bridge Builders, after watching From Martha to Grandma, chronicled their own journey from estrangement to reconciliation. "We wanted you to see the ripples your courage has created," the grandmother in the film explained in a brief introduction. "Your willingness to share your story gave us hope that we might write a new ending to ours." Watching another family's journey, different in details but similar in emotional terrain, brought perspective to our own experience. The legal documents that had once seemed so confrontational, so potentially destructive to family bonds, appeared in this new context as necessary instruments of healing, keys that unlock doors previously sealed by pride, misunderstanding, and social pretension. After the screening, Judge Harmon asked to address our gathered families. A dignified woman in her 60s, she had presided over hundreds of family court cases during her career, witnessing both bitter divisions and remarkable reconciliations. "When I began my judicial career," she told us, "grandparents' rights were considered secondary. almost an afterthought in family law. The assumption was that parents alone should determine their children's relationships. She paused, surveying our gathered families. What your stories demonstrate, what Eleanor and Richard's journey so powerfully illustrates, is that family bonds transcend individual preference. They belong to all members, across generations. The judge's words resonated with me deeply. The pain of being relegated to Martha had stemmed precisely from this misconception, that Richard and Melissa could simply erase my role in their children's lives, as if our connection existed at their discretion rather than as an intrinsic reality. The following morning, I found myself walking along the lake shore with Andrew Pearson. Though he had aged somewhat in the years since he first took my case, he maintained the same thoughtful demeanor and clear-eyed perspective that had guided me through the legal process. "Did you ever imagine," I asked him, "when I walked into your office that day that we'd end up here? That those documents would lead to all this?" I gestured toward the retreat center where families were engaged in various activities, connections being forged, healing continuing. Andrew smiled. "I'd like to claim such foresight, but no. I saw a grandmother being denied her rightful place, and a legal remedy that might help. The rest, the documentary, bridge builders, this gathering, that's all been your creation, Eleanor. Not mine alone," I demurred. "Richard had to be willing to change. The twins had to be resilient enough to adapt to the truth. Melissa had to open herself to a different understanding of family." "True," Andrew acknowledged. "But it began with your refusal to accept erasure, your insistence on being recognized for who you truly were." His observation gave me pause. At the time, pursuing legal action had felt desperate rather than courageous, a last resort when all other avenues had failed. Yet viewed from the perspective of a decade later, that decision represented something more, a declaration of worth, an assertion that grandparent-grandchild bonds deserved protection under law and in practice. Later that day, our family gathered for a private ceremony by the lake. Just Richard, Melissa, the twins, and me. Richard had suggested we each bring something symbolic to mark the occasion. Emma brought one of her paintings, a triptych showing 3 versions of me. Martha with cleaning supplies, the transitional period after the legal intervention, and, finally, Grandma Eleanor in my garden, surrounded by family. The progression was subtle but powerful, capturing not just external changes, but the internal transformation from constrained pretense to authentic presence. Jackson's contribution was, typically practical, a small wooden box he had crafted, its lid inlaid with our family tree in different woods. "Oak for Grandpa James's side," he explained, pointing to the darker wood. "Maple for Dad, cherry for Emma and me. And these mother-of-pearl inlays are for the women who married in, Mom, and whoever Emma eventually marries." "Assuming I marry at all," Emma interjected with teenage conviction, "I might choose a completely different path." Richard brought a letter his father had written him upon his graduation from high school, a heartfelt message about maintaining integrity and remembering one's roots that had proven prophetic in ways James could never have anticipated. Melissa surprised us all with her contribution, the original employment contract she had drafted when hiring me as their housekeeper. "I kept it," she explained, her expression a mixture of embarrassment and resolution. "As a reminder of who I was then and who I've chosen to become instead." My offering was simple, the business card Andrew had given me the day I sought his counsel, now faded and worn from years in my wallet. "The turning point," I said simply. "The moment I decided to reclaim my identity as your grandmother." Together, we placed these items in Jackson's wooden box. Richard suggested we bury it beside the lake, but Emma, ever the preservationist, proposed an alternative. "We should keep it visible," she argued. "Not hidden away like the truth was hidden. Maybe in the living room at home where it reminds us every day." Her suggestion prevailed, That wooden box now sits on a shelf in Richard and Melissa's home, a tangible reminder of our journey from deception to honesty, from division to unity. The weekend retreat concluded with a commitment ceremony where each family articulated lessons learned and pledges for the future. When our turn came, we stood together at the front of the lodge, facing the other families who had traveled similar paths. We pledged to remember, Richard began, that authentic relationship requires courage, the courage to acknowledge our full selves, including the parts that don't match our preferred self-image. We pledged to recognize, Melissa continued, that family transcends social categories and arbitrary distinctions, that genuine connection thrives in honesty, not in carefully curated presentations. We pledge to honor all branches of our family tree, Emma added, not just the ones that look impressive on paper, and to respect the legal protections, Jackson concluded practically, that ensure family bonds can't be erased by personal preference or convenience. When my turn came, I found myself momentarily overwhelmed by the journey that had brought us to this moment, from the humiliation of posing as Martha to the dignity of standing with my family as myself, fully acknowledged, fully integrated. I pledge to remember, I said finally, that legal documents may initiate healing, but only love completes it. That reconciliation requires both justice and grace, and that family, once truly reclaimed, becomes stronger at the broken places. As we drove home from the retreat, the twins dozed in the back seat while Richard navigated the highway. Melissa, seated beside him, worked quietly on her tablet, reviewing materials for an upcoming hospital foundation meeting. I gazed out the window, reflecting on how our family configuration had evolved from those painful early years. "Mom," Richard said softly, glancing at me in the rearview mirror. "I've been meaning to ask you something. The state advocacy position you mentioned, the one working with legislators on grandparents' rights reform. Have you decided about taking it?" The position represented a significant commitment, potentially years of work helping craft legislation that would provide clearer protections for grandparent-grandchild relationships in cases of family estrangement. "I'm still considering it," I replied. "It would mean a lot of time in the state capitol, testifying at hearings, meeting with legislators." "You should do it," Richard said decisively. "No one understands the issue better than you do, both the legal aspects and the emotional reality." "I agree," Melissa added, looking up from her tablet. "Your experience gives you credibility that academics and professional advocates can't match." Their encouragement meant more than they could know, a complete reversal from the days when they had deemed me unsuitable for even acknowledged contact with my own grandchildren. "I'll think about it," I promised, though in truth, I had already begun drafting my acceptance letter. 2 weeks later, I stood in the state capitol rotunda, being formally introduced as the newest member of the Family Relationships Advisory Council. Richard, Melissa, and the twins sat in the front row, applauding as I stepped to the podium to make brief remarks. My journey to this position began with legal documents, I told the assembled legislators, advocates, and media representatives. Documents that forced recognition of a relationship that should never have needed legal protection in the first place. My hope is that our work here will create frameworks where such interventions become increasingly unnecessary, where family bonds are respected not because courts mandate it, but because our culture recognizes their inherent value. As I concluded my remarks, I caught Emma's eye in the audience. She gave me a subtle thumbs up, her expression reflecting pride untainted by the social embarrassment that had once driven Richard to hide his background. Later, as we celebrated with lunch at a nearby restaurant, Jackson raised his water glass in a toast. "To Grandma Eleanor," he declared with teenage formality, "who went from cleaning lady to legislator." We all laughed, including me. The distance from Martha to this moment was indeed remarkable, a transformation made possible by legal intervention but sustained by something far more powerful, the courage to claim our authentic selves and insist upon recognition, The legal documents opened the door, I corrected gently. But it's the family we've built since. Then that matters most. Richard reached across the table to squeeze my hand. To both, he amended. To the wisdom of knowing when legal action is necessary, and the grace to move beyond it toward genuine reconciliation. As we continued our meal, sharing plans and possibilities, I marveled at how completely our family narrative had evolved. The painful chapter of Martha the cleaning lady had not been erased. We acknowledged it openly, drew lessons from it, even referenced it in family jokes, but it no longer defined us. It had become simply one chapter in a much larger, richer story that continued to unfold. From Martha to Grandma Eleanor. From legal adversaries to a unified family. From painful estrangement to purposeful advocacy. Our journey had come full circle, transformed by truth, sustained by love, and ultimately redeemed by the healing power of authentic connection. The CR. Legal documents that initiated our reconciliation had served their purpose. The relationships they helped restore now flourished on their own terms, not because courts mandated recognition, but because we had all discovered, through difficult experience, the irreplaceable value of family bonds honestly acknowledged and genuinely embraced. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.